The wind howled across the desolate expanse of Vestra 4, carrying with it a fine red dust that clung to everything. The excavation lights flickered as static interference crackled through the comms, sending a sharp, unnatural pulse through the earpiece of Ezra Ford. He frowned, adjusting his HUD. Something wasn't right. Kasparov, check the readings again, Ezra called out, his voice tight with tension. Below him, Dr. Alina Kasparov hunched over a portable scanner, her gloved fingers dancing over the holographic controls. The machine whirred in protest, struggling to process the data flooding its sensors. "This can't be right," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "The resonance pattern, it's artificial. But the composition—" A sharp clang echoed through the dig site. Every movement stopped, every breath caught. Shit. Ezra was already moving, sliding down the loose rock, his boots kicking up clouds of rust-colored dust. The excavation team stood frozen, their drills and plasma cutters hovering just inches above a metallic surface, exposed beneath centuries of compacted stone. The material gleamed faintly under the floodlights, its surface impossibly smooth, untouched by time. Ezra dropped to one knee, running a hand over the exposed structure. It was cold, too cold, like it had never felt the heat of the sun, never absorbed the warmth of a living world. And yet, as his fingertips traced the edge of a faint engraving, a whisper of static crawled up his arm, sending a shiver down his spine. Alina's scanner beeped wildly, the screen flooded with incomprehensible data streams. "Ezra, this metal—" She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's not in our records." Ezra's pulse quickened. "Not in our records?" It doesn't match anything. Not Terran alloys. Not alien composites. It shouldn't exist. A distant boom rumbled beneath them, like something deep underground had just shifted. The excavation site trembled. The air itself seemed to tighten as if the entire planet was holding its breath. And then the metal hummed. It was a low vibration, deep and resonant, like the sound of a distant war drum, felt more than heard. The dust lifted, spiraling unnaturally in the air. Lights flickered. Comms cut out. Ezra yanked his hand back, his heart hammering. What the hell was that? Alina's face had gone pale. She turned her scanner toward him. "Ezra," she swallowed. "This structure, it's not buried here," she exhaled, her breath shaking. "It's still active." And as the realization sank in, the ground beneath them collapsed. Ezra barely had time to register Alina's words before the world beneath him gave way. The metal structure groaned, then snapped open, not like something breaking, but something unlocking. Gravity twisted in his stomach as he fell into the dark. The impact never came. Instead, a force, smooth, controlled, caught him mid-air. His body hung weightless for a moment, the sensation like drifting underwater. Then, as suddenly as it came, the invisible grip was released. He hit the ground hard, dust kicking up in plumes around him. Alina landed beside him with a pained gasp. Ezra groaned, blinking through the settling haze. His HUD flickered wildly, struggling to recalibrate in the dim blue glow that now surrounded them. The cavern was massive, its ceiling vanishing into shadow, the walls lined with smooth, interlocking plates of the same strange alloy. A structure, no, a facility stretched before them, untouched by time, humming with an ancient electric pulse. Monolithic pillars stood in precise formation, covered in markings that weren't alien but weren't entirely human either. Alina's breath hitched. "Ezra, look." He followed her gaze, and for the first time, his mind couldn't process what he was seeing. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, its surface illuminated with shifting glyphs. Suspended above it, locked in a slow, steady rotation, was a single, perfect ingot of metal. But not just any metal. This was the alloy, the one they had just uncovered above ground. "This is impossible," Alina whispered, stepping forward as if drawn by something unseen. Her voice barely carried over the deep hum of energy that seemed to breathe through the walls. "This means it wasn't just a ruin. This place is active, operational." Ezra rose to his feet, every instinct screaming that they shouldn't be here. And yet, he couldn't look away. If this thing's still running, then whoever built it never intended for it to be forgotten. Alina turned a flicker of something in her eyes, not fear, but understanding. "No," she murmured. "It's been waiting." The words had barely left her lips when the walls moved. A deep, Resonant shift echoed through the chamber as something ancient responded to their presence. Symbols flared to life along the structure's surface, pulsing in synchronized patterns. The pedestal's hum intensified, its glow casting long shadows as the ingot of metal descended. Then, without warning, a voice that didn't belong to any living thing, spoke directly into their minds. Human designation recognized. Ezra froze. Access granted. The entire facility came to life, and just like that, the fate of humanity was no longer in its own hands. The chamber roared to life. Walls shifted, revealing unseen corridors that stretched into the dark. Symbols pulsed like a heartbeat, each glow pulsing deeper into the unseen vastness of the facility. Ezra's breath was sharp and shallow. The voice, it hadn't spoken through sound. It had echoed inside him. Alina staggered back, clutching her temple. "Did you—"
Yeah,"
Ezra said, his voice tight. His body was still tense, his instincts screaming that they were standing on the edge of something far greater than themselves. The alloy ingot had settled onto the pedestal, humming softly. It wasn't just metal. It was a key. A deep, mechanical rumble rolled through the chamber, sending dust spiraling through the air. Ezra turned sharply as an archway slid open, revealing a corridor lined with smooth, impossibly perfect walls. Walls that weren't built but shaped as if the entire structure had been grown rather than constructed. These were preserved, lifelike, as if their owners had simply stopped mid-step. Humanoid, but not quite human. Their features eerily familiar. Their armor marked with sigils that Ezra recognized, not from history books, not from alien archives, but from ancient human myths. Alina's voice was barely above a whisper. "Ezra, these are not extraterrestrials." She stepped closer, her scanner shaking in her hands. "They have genetic markers, human markers." Ezra felt the ground sway beneath him. No, that wasn't possible. Humans weren't old enough to have built something like this. Humans weren't supposed to have been here before. His heart pounded as the realization hit like a hammer. This wasn't just a ruin of an ancient civilization. This was a tomb. And whatever had been buried, these warriors hadn't left the job unfinished. A sharp, high-pitched warning tone cut through the air. Alina's scanner screeched, throwing up error messages faster than she could clear them. Ezra felt it before he heard it, a sudden shift in air pressure. The subtle hum of dormant machinery no longer dormant. The walls were reawakening. "Containment breach detected." The voice returned. It wasn't neutral this time. It was alerted, aware. "Security protocol reinitializing." Ezra's blood turned to ice. "Move. Now." Alina barely had time to react before the first sentinel moved. It came from the farthest alcove, a massive, armored construct, its metallic frame untouched by time. It wasn't like the lifeless bodies they had found. This thing had never stopped functioning. Its head snapped toward them, a cold, inhuman gaze locking onto Ezra like a predator spotting prey. Then, with bone-shattering speed, it lunged. Ezra barely threw himself to the side before the sentinel's armored fist cratered the floor where he had just stood. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the room. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Alina's arm and dragging her into the corridor. More sentinels began to stir, their long, dormant forms reanimating, their movements eerily fluid. Too fast for something made of metal. The air was thick with the sound of ancient mechanisms hissing, grinding, and engaging. They didn't stop to look back. They ran. The corridors twisted and reshaped themselves as they moved, closing pathways and forcing them deeper into the unknown. Ezra's boots pounded against the alloy floor, his breath ragged, the glow of shifting symbols flashing past him like warning signs he couldn't read. Alina gasped beside him. "It's hurting us." Ezra clenched his teeth. It wasn't hunting them. It was guiding them. They burst into another chamber, doors slamming shut behind them. Ezra whirled, his pulse hammering, expecting the sentinels to break through, but they didn't. The walls sealed themselves with a final, resonant thud. Ezra turned, his back slick with sweat, his muscles still locked in fight mode. The room was different from the others, circular, dimly lit. A figure sat upon it, slumped forward, encased in the same alloy that had changed everything. Unlike the warriors outside, this one was preserved, a golden helm covering its face, its hands resting upon the arms of the chair in perfect stillness. A voice, not mechanical this time, but human, tired, ancient, filled the room. You should not have come here. Ezra's breath caught in his throat. The figure lifted its head. But now that you have... The alloy around its body cracked open. You must understand what you have awakened. Ezra's muscles locked, his instincts screaming at him to move, to run. But something deeper, something almost primal, kept him rooted to the spot. Alina's voice was a whisper. Ezra, that's a human. He knew. He had known the moment the figure spoke, the weight of those words pressing against his chest like a physical force. The sentinels outside hadn't chased them in here. It had been leading them to this moment. To him. The last piece of alloy crumbled from the figure's arm, and his fingers flexed, stiff but still powerful. His armor, though ancient, looked as though it had been forged only yesterday. But his face, what little was visible beneath the cracked golden helm, told a different story. His skin was etched with age, not in the way of years, but in the way of time itself having worn him down. His voice, when he spoke again, was heavy with something Ezra couldn't quite name. You don't understand what you've taken. Ezra forced himself to step forward. Who are you? The figure exhaled, slow and deep, as if pulling breath from a place long forgotten. He lifted his head fully now, and in the flickering glow of the chamber's shifting runes, his eyes met Ezra's. I am what remains of those who came before. The words weren't just words. They carried weight, an impact that rippled through Ezra's bones. We were once as you are, explorers, builders, survivors. We reached beyond the stars, just as you have. But we found something we should not have. Alina stepped beside Ezra, her breath uneven. The alloy. The figure nodded, his golden helm catching the dim light. It was never meant to be a gift. It was a curse we created ourselves. The chamber shifted, and the walls around them changed, flickering with projections of a past that had been buried beneath eons of dust. They saw cities that stretched beyond the horizon, towers woven from the same alloy that had now become the center of war. They saw armies clad in metal that no weapon could pierce, waging war with weapons so advanced that they bent reality itself. The alloy had given them power, too much power. It had allowed them to create, to build, to dominate. Their wars became endless, their hunger insatiable. We thought ourselves invincible. We were wrong. The images flashed forward, ships burning in orbit, soldiers in alloy armor slaughtering their own, the very fabric of their society collapsing under the weight of a war that could never be won. And at the heart of it all, a final decision. The figure on the throne, once a king, once a leader, had made the only choice left. He had sealed them away. I locked this place so it would never be found, but you have brought it back into the light. Ezra staggered back, his mind racing. No, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. The alloy had been their advantage, their path to survival against the galactic powers that sought to crush humanity before it could rise. The ground shook violently, and the chamber darkened as the walls trembled with the weight of something awakening. The facility had waited for this moment, for someone to come. And now it had a decision to make. A new voice thundered through the chamber. Not the old warriors, not the mechanical hum of the facility, but something deeper. Final protocol engaged. Choose. The throne sank into the ground, and in its place, two separate panels rose. One side held a weapon, the same kind of weapon that had ended a civilization before. The other side held a device, a small, pulsing core of energy, the heart of the facility's failsafe, the alloy. The technology, the knowledge itself. Ezra's heart pounded in his chest. He felt Alina's eyes on him, waiting. The old warrior said nothing. This wasn't his choice to make. The galaxy would never stop hunting them. Humanity would never be given the chance to rise. If he took the weapon, he could ensure their survival. He could arm humanity with the one thing that no other species could counter. The images still burned in his mind. His hands clenched into fists. The chamber shook again. The facility waiting, demanding his decision. Alina took a slow breath beside him. Ezra, she murmured. This is the moment history will remember. His pulse thundered, and then he made his choice. Ezra took a slow, deliberate step forward. His breath was steady, but inside, his mind was a storm. The chamber still hummed, pulsing with the weight of centuries of choices waiting for his. His eyes flicked between the two objects before him, a symbol of war, of conquest, of humanity's chance to stand unchallenged. And the device, a simple core, small and unassuming, yet capable of erasing everything, wiping the slate clean before the cycle could begin again. The echoes of a lost civilization surrounded him, their mistakes laid bare. They had believed in their own invincibility, and now they were nothing more than whispers trapped in metal and dust. He imagined it, returning to Earth, delivering this power to his people. No more fear, no more looking over their shoulders. Humanity would rise, not as survivors, not as diplomats, but as kings. But then he saw them, the bodies in the corridors, frozen in time, the ruins of their victories, the price of invincibility. Alina's voice was barely a whisper. Ezra. His fingers curled around the device. The moment he lifted it, the entire chamber shuddered as if the facility itself had felt his decision. A low, resonant hum filled the air, and the ancient warrior on the throne, still watching, let out a slow breath, not of relief, not of disappointment, but of understanding. Ezra met his gaze, and for the first time, the warrior nodded. You have chosen differently than we did. The walls around them began to break apart, unraveling like fabric dissolving in a storm. The facility had been waiting for this, for someone to end it. Ezra could feel it in his bones. The place wasn't just shutting down. The moment he activated the device, there would be no going back, no second chances. Alina swallowed. This means we lose it all. Ezra exhaled. No. He tightened his grip on the core, feeling its hum vibrate through his palm. We save us. He pressed the activation panel. The facility let out a low, deafening roar. The walls splintered, the symbols flickering one last time before vanishing into darkness. A wave of energy burst outward, racing through the corridors, consuming the sentinels, the engravings, the throne, everything. Ezra grabbed Alina's wrist, pulling her toward the only way out. Run! They bolted through the tunnels. The ground cracked beneath them, the metal unraveling into dust and something ancient fading away. The exit was within reach, a sliver of light in the darkness. Ezra dove forward, shoving Alina ahead just. The impact sent them sprawling onto the cold sands of Vestra 4. Ezra hit the ground hard, and the breath ripped from his lungs. Dust filled the air, thick and suffocating. They lay there, gasping. The stars above remained unchanged, indifferent to what had just transpired. The universe moved on, unaware that, at this moment, humanity had been given a second chance. Alina turned to him, her face unreadable. We could have ruled. Ezra let out a breath, not of regret, but of something lighter. He looked up at the endless sky, the vast, unwritten future stretching before them. Yeah, he admitted. But we're still here. He pushed himself up, the dust of the past still clinging to him but no longer weighing him down, and for the first time since stepping onto this planet, he felt like they had won.